Hello and welcome everyone to this evening's programme with our panellists Tommy McKerney and Barry Murray of the Peadar Socialist Republican Forum, and joined with us this evening to go into a more in-depth discussion and focused discussion on Iran and the continuation of our programme from last week, looking at Western lies, Western propaganda, Western narratives around what has happened in Iran and what is currently happening. We are very pleased to see Dr. Saeed Shaf join us again. He spoke in great detail last week, so if you didn't catch last week's programme, it's on the Peadar Socialist Republican Forum YouTube, will this one be after tonight's show. And also glad to say that Morgan O'Hearda, who went into quite a lot of detail on the events that happened last week, but of course since last week, in the last couple of days, things are moving at a very fast pace. I'm delighted that Morgan is here to give us an update on what's happening in the last 48 hours. So to you, Barry, if Iran has been under continuous imperialist assault for over a century through coups, sanctions and these covert operations, and also the economic warfare, why then, Barry, in your opinion, are contemporary social and economic crises presented in our Western discourse here? Why are they presented just as internal failures rather than predictable outcomes of imperialist intervention and enforced neoliberal restructuring?
Yes, Sir Saeed said last week, we have to understand that Iran is probably central to the survival of China and Russia, which are the eventual, China in particular being the eventual target of American imperialism. And of course, imperialism knows that too, and clearly the CIA and the various intelligence agencies are in the Western world and everywhere else are exploiting the disturbances within Iran and trying to create the situation where there's regime change if they can manage it. And I mean, as far back as 1921, the British installed their own puppet because of oil as well. So we're that far back. And we know what happened in relation to Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953, and the CIA, MI6 and all the other agencies were involved in that. And yet today, the Iranian government are still implacably opposed to American imperialism and Israeli Zionism. And they have also been a thorn in the side of imperialism and Zionism right throughout the Middle East by their support for Hezbollah and Hamas. And indeed, their support's not on any ideological or even religious grounds, because I mean, they've also supported the like of the PFLP General Command secular group within Palestine as well. And as a consequence of all of that, Iran has suffered seriously from Yankee military sanctions and sanctions of all kinds. That said, as a consequence of that, indeed as well, Iran's internal developments are probably much more complex than most people would know about, or even is out there in the public arena. When the state of the country, when after the Shah was deposed in 1879, was that there was a level of childbirth deaths of 80 per 1,000 births, 70% illiteracy, and a life expectancy of just 51 years. And these are only sort of a small snippet of what the situation was like within Iran and has been since the Iranian Revolution. But even with all that, Fidel Castro praised the Iranian Revolution and said that it was an enormous popular force, and he also praised the Iranian people for their steadfastness and who died for the cause of the revolution in hundreds of thousands. But Castro did point out that the revolution was very likely going to stick to its strong religious and nationalistic tendencies, and as it turns out, he was right about that bit. But socialists and communists have to examine the concrete dynamics of any internal machinations within a country, and especially those based around class. Even though that the revolution was a sort of a multi-class coalition made up of the rural poor and the urban poor, the religious petty bourgeoisie, clerics and intellectuals, but most importantly of all, the working class, who were the acknowledged cutting edge of the revolution. And the revolution exposed the deep sort of contradictions within Iranian society, which is in all societies. That's nothing new. And it brought to the surface all sorts of existing class struggles and new contests over economic structure and political power and political identities. Out of that, there was a sort of two major political visions. There was a sort of the Islamic free market proponents who wanted to restrict social change primarily to the superstructure and cultural programs while preserving the framework for capitalism. And then there was the social justice advocates who wanted a mixed economy with Islamic wealth distribution mechanisms, sort of probably niche capitalism, social democracy maybe in a way. And I mean, that's only a very broad sort of picture. There's probably a whole lot of other things around ethnicity and various religious factions and factions within factions and all sorts of stuff, but you'd be forever here looking at all of that. The relentless government suppression of both established and new working class organisations then created the space for the emergence of a new class in Iran. The comprador bourgeois exported their capital abroad, but they also left substantial assets in Iran at the time of the revolution. And the revolutionary Islamic Republic, of course, confiscated these assets, and rightly so. In the new constitution then, the revolution explicitly established a sort of a mixed economy system, and this was agreed by an overwhelming majority of the population of Iran. Established a free healthcare, free education system, and established employment and housing as a national right. So a lot of that stuff was very advanced within a country like that for its time. The banking, the major industries and the large mining operations became state-controlled entities under the public ownership, and the private sector was de facto marginalised. But in reality, though, the bourgeois managed to expand private credit and financial institutions and securing control over import and the distribution of essential goods that were especially restricted during the Iran-Iraq war. And that new class sort of emerged on the back of what was on the back of the confiscated assets that were being transferred to government, affiliated individuals and sort of revolutionary institutions, and they effectively circumvented the supposedly nationalised status. And corruption during the Iran-Iraq war, as in any war anywhere in the world ever, was rife. But it played a decisive role in reshaping Iran's post-revolutionary class structure. This new class involved in all this skullduggery was amassed enormous profits by purchasing imported goods at government subsidised rates and reselling them at full market prices, simple as. And throughout the 80s, the battle between the two competing visions intensified. Those wanting to reintegrate Iran into the global capitalist system against those advocating for a more indigenous and independent economic model. Now, the question might arise there, theocratic capitalism any better than American capitalism or world capitalism for that matter, or global capitalism? Like any other capitalist country trapped in these issues. The issues that were fought around was the boundaries of state economic interventions, in other words, where the state should or should not be involved, wealth distribution, labour reform laws, land reform, and public housing policies. And all these are, as we know here, are central to people's lives and central to how an economy, the ideological direction of any economy. And then the death of Ayatollah Khomeini in 1989 seemed to present an opportunity for capitalists to advance their agenda. And in the autumn of 1981, the Plan and Budget Organisation contained some secret documents that would define Iran's economic trajectory for the following years. It was a sort of an economic adjustment program, sort of like what the IMF or World Bank might do. And that is designated as sort of the official beginning of the era of neoliberal policies within Iran, revolutionary Iran. And it set the stage for the original revolutionary economic vision. It had profound implications in Iranian society and political economy. And all the consequences of neoliberalism that happens in any capitalist country happened in Iran too, like currency devaluations, international sanctions, domestic neoliberal policies for over 30 years. And that has severely impacted on wage earners, that is to say, the majority, the working class. The government, in an effort to stave off protest and whatever else, adjusted the official currency exchange many times to try and what they said was ostensibly to confront the rentier class. In reality, however, what ended up was that private sector importers and exporters with close ties to the political elite had consistently benefited from the preferential exchange rates, exemptions and low interest loans. But most importantly, they benefited from the privatization programs. And all of this was the contents or the genesis of the economic crisis that's happening now in Iran. Foreign direct investment was concerned. Article 44 of the Constitution was reinterpreted deliberately incorrectly, and by the way, to allow the Iranian economy to be exploited by outside investors. This was what, of course, the neoliberals wanted, and the so-called market liberalisation. And then the rising power of these capitalist oligarchs, they used their power and influence to become agents for the sanctioned oil by saying that they were now agents for and selling the nationalised oil. That generated enormous profits, but of course only for the so-called agents themselves. It didn't do anything for the economy. While the economy was seriously damaged, there was a lucrative opportunity for these well-connected intermediaries. And again, the poor and working poor of Iran, the majority, suffered the consequences. Those who were trying to justify these neoliberal policies sort of tried to state that the privatisation remains fundamentally sound. I wonder where we hear that before. But that it was just implemented incorrectly, which is laughable. They know that's not the truth. And some of them within the Iranian regime wanted to compromise with US imperialism to attract foreign direct investment. This is presented, of course, not as an abandonment of revolutionary principles, but a pragmatic economic necessity. The revolutionary vision of 1979 of economic independence and social justice has been abandoned for integration into global capitalism on terms largely dictated by Yanks and other world imperialist forces. The revolutionary rhetoric versus neoliberal practice means that public assets are systematically transferred to private companies and individuals. That's nothing new, of course. As always, the economic burden is carried by those who have nothing to sell but their labour. It's interesting that in 2007, Samir Amin, an Egyptian communist, expressed scepticism about what Iran's national bourgeois project would achieve. And he went on to say that the neoliberal bourgeoisie posed the most serious internal threat to national sovereignty. And only 8 years ago, the economics professor, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Ismail Hossein Zada, he said, and I quote, "The Iranian economy is mired in deep recession. The real productive sector of the economy is paralysed, largely by out of control and often illicit imports that have replaced domestic production. Rent seeking, corruption and looting of national resources is pervasive. Both unemployment and inflation are extremely high. National currency is on the verge of collapse, and financial resources of the country are disproportionately invested in unproductive and parasitic activities such as buying and selling of precious metals, foreign currencies, real estate, and the like." The present President Masoud Pezeshkian, who succeeded Raisi after his death in a helicopter accident, is effectively a social democrat reformist. Now, he promised to avoid attacks on the poor and working poor, but in fact, the neoliberalism continued. As a consequence, working class organisations have demanded, as of March 2025, a 70% minimum wage increase, and have been successful in attracting other social forces committed to resisting what they call the Great Satan arrogance, and appear to be dedicated to revitalising the original ideals of the revolution. Now, whether that's the case or not remains to be seen. This working class movement at the centre of all of this could well serve as the vanguard of revolutionary forces. And we have to remember too that the working class were the battering ram during the triumph of 1979, the revolution. And it is probably still the only force capable of serving as an impregnable fortress against external pressures and internal compromises in defence of national sovereignty. And it represents the most significant challenge to the neoliberal transformation of the Iranian economy. So no matter what happens, either with diplomacy or war, Iranian revolutionary ideals will ultimately have to be tackled by destroying the neoliberalism that is gripping the country. Barry,
thank you very much. It's quite a comprehensive overview just of how the economy has evolved in particular, and what the idea of revolutionary groups or parties are hoping to achieve. But Saeed, I'm going to come to you. Is this revolutionary grouping, do they have legitimacy? Do they have the power to achieve a socialist Iran, or is that even relevant to our discussion tonight when we're talking about, because we're seeing so much Western propaganda promoting a revolution on the streets, and people are either very confused or not considering the principal and secondary contradictions of Iran. What's your take on Barry's overview?
Yeah, definitely it's a brilliant take Barry got, especially when he mentioned Samir Amin, who was an authority. He was a friend of mine, passed away a few years ago. Fantastic communist who focused on the global south, in-depth research on that area. At the same thing, Mr. Zada, the professor, he as well mentioned. But let's at the beginning, the Iranian Revolution was a popular coalition between the people, the nationalists, the socialists, the communists, and the Iranian religious kind of class. who were very influential from the beginning of the revolution. Khomeini was based on in Iraq and then moved to France, and from France he used to send his cassettes. And that Imam Khomeini was very, very influential in the throwing out of the regime. During that time, when he was persecuted by the Shah, which is Shah was of Iran at the time, was the kind of the policeman of the region who represented at the time the interest of the imperialism, while Israel is growing and beefing up. Israel at the time depended on everything from oil and all of that from Iran. And this is, I think I mentioned that the war of 1967 was broke. Part of the reason of it when Nasser of Egypt blocked the Red Sea kind of access for the Iranian oil coming to Israel. And they only allowed them to use the Mediterranean if they can. This is what the Houthi movement done in the genocide during the genocide war on Gaza. Blocked the Red Sea in front of any of the vessels going to the Zionist entity. The same thing. But Nasser at the time, as well as a socialist, scientific socialist, Egyptian Arabic leader, supported the Iranian Imam Khomeini, the socialists, the clerk, the religious, all of that, and even supported them financially, find places for them to stay safe and secure from the Shah. Once the Iranian revolution happened, the clash of ownership of the revolution happened between the socialists and the nationalists. The nationalists were leaning toward, at the time, the religious, but the very popular forces in there were Imam Khomeini and his entourage. Even the Palestinian resistance led by Arafat at the time secured the arrival of Khomeini to Iran when the Shah fled. So it was not a complicated, but was massive kind of revolution that it have an influence still today, because the Iranian revolution at the time, it's eliminated the presence of the United States of America in that area, especially as I mentioned before, after the fall of Egypt under the kind of control of Zionist and American hegemony. Iran is when it came to out of the American domination, and it brought a revolution in the region, kept the balance of power in that region is not failing for the United States of America. But economically, you have to understand one of the things: without a real socialist kind of engine in there behind the Iranian revolution, you won't find any much of a change, except what they done. They done a great job in making their industries indigenous and developing their scientific institutes. As Barry mentioned, the expectation of life is increased. Hospitals, women role in Iran is massive. Before women were like out of the picture, except some photos from the 50s and 60s and 70s. They say women with bikinis on somewhere. This is what the West love to see and beam in the media. This is what women for them object, not a woman who is leading, a woman who's educating, a woman who's manufacturing. And this, even, to the limit, I was watching something, Italian TV put an image for Iranian revolution, Iranian family from the era of the 70s. That was taken from the Goodfellas movie. For De Niro and the rest of them, it's De Niro and the actors from the Goodfellas movie. I love that movie. It's okay, Bob's movie, but I love the movie. It's unbelievable how, because the Zionist network in there who is beaming this artificial intelligence manipulation, the social media till today, it have as well, it's not just creating atrocities and linking it to the Iranian police and apparatus. There is something more dangerous, if you allow me to just elaborate in this little bit. They trying to shift the focus from a genocide state like the Zionist entity, who is continuing its genocide on the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, in Lebanon, and here and there, and shifting it on the Iranian, while they're manipulating a lot of footage and videos and clips of the atrocities and the war of crimes committed by the Zionist entity and disseminate them in the media as they were committed by the Iranian. By the time the people discover that, the damage is done, and the calls for the West come to the aid of the revolutionaries in the street, which mean the rioters in here, the Mossad and the CIA rioters in the street. The damage is already done, and the influence, but that can shows you how they look at the Western population, because this is directed at the Western population. Iranian people, they are cut off from the internet of the war. They have local internet now because of the atrocities committed by these rioters in there. So this is directed at Western kind of audience. And the Zionist kind of networks, now they say, directing at the Palestinian solidarity movement internationally, the global movement. Where are you now to come to the streets and call for the Iranian revolution and support the Iranian and help and change that kind of tyrannic regime? So you are not credible actors and activists in here in supporting the human rights as you claiming that. So they're trying to use all the angles to save the Zionist entity, claim the atrocities of the doctors killing by the Zionist entity. It's Iranian who did this, by ambulance drivers who has been handcuffed and buried with their ambulances. Even one of them, my cousins, that happened in Iran. It didn't happen in there. All this destruction, they're trying to frame it, manipulating the media with artificial intelligence, the Zionists and some propagandists in the West doing that right now. But but that shows how they think the people are naive, and they think people, they are going to believe this artificial intelligence manipulation. And as I said, it doesn't matter to them because they have no regard to our opinion or the public or anything. They wanted to create a momentum. By the time we discover, the damage is done and the attack has happened. This is, go ahead, I don't want to take any more, but the only thing I want to say at the Iranian economy in that, they followed an example which is used to be in Egypt, in Nasser, Egypt, in during the revolutionary period, 50s, 60s, and up till 1970. The Egyptian, with their socialist, scientific socialist revolution in Egypt at the time, managed to create unbelievable kind of successful, developed economy and industries. They, as they say, from the needle to the rocket or to the airplane, they manufactured everything. Even in China, Chou Enlai, the prime minister of China at the time in the 60s, used to say, I'm taking the Egyptian model. So now the Iranian are doing exactly that. What the Egyptian done, how they make their industries indigenous, how they looked after the farmers, how they done that, but was not with socialist outlook, is with nationalist and using Islamic economy outlook. Islamic economy is close enough to the ideals of socialism, but it's not socialism at the end of the day. So they are building institutes, building universities, as I said, empowering women in the country. Even I heard, like I was astonished to see a boy of 12 years of age in the pro-government demonstration in Tehran, how he articulated why he is in the street when he says, after the war of the 12 days on Iran, they failed to destroy the country. And now they're using the rioters to destroy our country from within, from the CIA. This is a little boy saying that. So the unity these people are showed, and they know the suffering. A lot of them knows the suffering they are facing today is coming from the maximum sanctions exposed on them by the West. I don't know, like in the West, people, how they buy that. They impose sanctions on them, make them suffer, make them like what happened in Libya, in Syria, and in Gaza. Eat tree leaves the people to starve to that limit, and drinking polluted water to survive, okay? And that's from, in Syria, they call it the Caesar sanction, Caesar sanction, which is the American imposed, okay, at the time to collapse the regime of Assad. and now they put their terror outfit to rule the country. In Gaza, the same thing. In Iran, the same thing. And then how to help these people bomb them, bombard the country, destroy the country to bring democracy and economic change in the country. This logic I don't understand. And people, or most of the Western countries, especially liberal kind of inclined people, support their elite who leads such campaigns. And they have experience from what happened in Iraq. There is 2 million Iraqis lost their lives because of sanctions and the war in Iraq. And still the one, when they found the whole legalities of that war is being manufactured by some people like Tony Blair, nobody come near them and put them to any kind of accountability. There is nothing. And still they believe in such criminals, what they say, and they follow them to destroy, because those people from the global south, they don't care about them. But it's not going to the global south. Now it's moving in the north, the global north. They want Canada to swallow. They want Greenland to swallow. And tomorrow, I think they will say Ireland cannot defend itself if there is Russian, a few ships around it. So why don't we annex Ireland as well? People have to think about the logic today being exported everywhere and being practiced by they call it, this is the madman politics. Madman politics was invented by Nixon during the Vietnam War. He used to play it like he's in the edge. He doesn't know what he's going to do. And they done the same thing. Even J.F. Kennedy done it on Cuba during the Cuban missiles. Are they going to trigger the nukes or not? So this kind of madman politics and designs have to stop. And people now to know the fire has reached their own homes.
Thank you, Saeed. Have to agree, this madman politics that lacks logic entirely. But what does that say about the liberal left in the West, Morgan? Because isn't the most important pillar of being a leftist the anti-imperialist pillar? So what can we say about, like, with this atrocity propaganda being created either through AI or set up, or small examples of terrible things that we're not denying either, but being amplified and repeated over and over and over by Western media? We expect that of mainstream media. But when we see so-called socialists, the Socialist Party, PBP, Rosa feminists out on the streets with their banners, women life, this kind of propaganda, after everything that we've been through, a genocide in Palestine, where we have looked at how imperialism works, we've looked at how sanctions work. Why is this happening? And can you give us an update on the last 48 hours so that we don't repeat ourselves from last week either?
Well, carrying on from last week, obviously, it's quite predictable that the so-called leaders of the Western left are carrying pro-imperialist propaganda. But something that I was a little bit disappointed in is the dispassionate response amongst regular, self-identifying socialists and communists in relation to Iran. The reporting to us, I'd imagine to anyone present here and to most people listening, is so outrageous. It is fantastical, and it's continued on from last week. Obviously, we covered quite a lot last week in terms of what they were reporting, but it's continued unabated. Despite the protests having died down, I wouldn't say the protests were dismantled by the state. The protesters simply went home because of what they were seeing unfold. The riots are what have been dismantled by the state through a variety of means that we obviously did cover last week. So in order to not repeat ourselves, I suppose we'll move on to continue what has been reported in last week. So obviously the Western media, they're avoiding what's being reported in Iran. And we mentioned last week, obviously, the killing of 3-year-old Melina Hassidi, in no small part galvanized the Iranian people to come out onto the streets and support the Republic of Iran. There's a figure called Irfan Soltani that's been paraded around Western media in the last week. I think he's been paraded around Western media because he looks very Western. Now, he looks like he could be your cousin. He looks like he could be your neighbor, whatever part of the West you're in. Very presentable young man. I think he's 26 years of age, but they're saying that he was on death row, essentially, and that he was going to be executed. Now, I couldn't find any proof that he was going to be executed. I know he was arrested, this man, and he does exist, but he seems to be convicted of rioting, but not being involved in any killing, and therefore was not, I don't believe he was actually due to be executed. But, this is just part of the manipulations ongoing. Saeed mentioned as well, like the objectifying of Iranian women, and I think Ty Kiki did a very brilliant bit of satire recently when he was presenting himself as someone who was supporting the Iranian revolution at the time, saying, yeah, I just can't wait for all these, attractive Persian women to become available. Maybe they'll come to Ireland and maybe we'll get to know each other and all this kind of stuff. And it just shows that this sort of objectifying people and using people that look like they could be your neighbor is quite clear manipulation, but it seems to work. Others on the left as well. Now, we're not talking about the leaders quite yet, but more on them later. A lot of people on the left seem to think that because of the success of the propaganda over the years, because of the conditioning against the Iranians, a lot of them seem to think that Iran and Israeli leadership benefit from each other, that they need a boogeyman in order to maintain power. Now, that might be true to an extent in Israel, but it is quite clear that the Iranian state is constantly being imperiled by a variety of different means, constantly escalating from the West. Now, these escalations represent an escalation in desperation. So in 2022, obviously, we saw the protest there, and I don't recall the numbers who died, but I think it was over 1,000. But we didn't see the level of violence inflicted upon citizens that we did this time. So a lot of the foreign agents this time were involved in the mass killing of civilians, as well as security forces, obviously. And because of that, the death toll, although I don't believe any of the reporting of 20,000 plus or 300,000 injured or all these fantastical figures that are being presented in the West, I don't believe any of those figures. But the Ayatollah Khamenei has actually intimated that there have been potentially multiple thousand people killed. Now, obviously, in the West, we're not going to hear probably from established media or state-sponsored media exactly who has done the killing. It's simply going to be left either unspoken or implied that it was the Iranian authorities, which clearly it wasn't. As you said, the reporting is getting more fantastical. The mass killings are increasing, and that represents a greater level of desperation in the West, because they wouldn't have been able to get as far as they did in 2022 using the same tactics. So this represents a more devilish set of tactics that they're employing. I believe that, as we spoke about last week, that it represents the death of this particular method of regime change in Iran. I do not think it is possible to collapse the Iranian state or throw it into enough chaos that they might be able to capitalize in any great way. Because of that, I think there's been a pivot from this method of regime change, and we'll get to it in a minute because it links into Syria. What do the West want with Iran right now? So obviously with the West, one of the methods they use, I suppose, manipulating people towards their means, is they use sort of a red herring. Now, we see this in Ireland with the implication of NATO membership, when in actual fact, the goal of the state and the goal of the, I suppose, the imperialists in the West is to incorporate Ireland into a new European defence framework. So that will be the step down from the threat of NATO membership. And you see that in Iran as well. So you see that in Iran through the use of the Shah, this reviled figure who's almost a cartoonish figure that no one respects, no one likes, will be outright rejected by just about anyone in Iran. Like, that is not the person that the West wants to install in Iran. This, as I say, is a red herring. So what do the West want with Iran? They want to break Iran up. So they want to permanently weaken the Iranian state. They want to create massive divisions in society. They want to perhaps collapse the leadership, and then for the factions within Iran to capitalize. So if you could imagine a balkanization of Iran, obviously the Azeris would perhaps fancy seceding and becoming part of Azerbaijan. The Kurds would want to probably carve out a piece for themselves. Obviously, the theocrats will have a large say in the possible carving up of Iran. That would probably result from quite a lot of internal struggle, a lot of bloodshed, a whole wide-scale regional instability. Once the republic is defeated, there's effectively nothing to stop outside powers getting involved, and it's not limited to just Israel and the United States. You would have Pakistan, Turkey with their own interests, the Gulf monarchies, Europe, and even China, of course. So such a defeat would destroy the country and permanently weaken it, and at least in terms of our own lifetimes and probably very far beyond. So that leads us into what's the pivot that I mentioned earlier. So they're pivoting away from this method of regime change. We mentioned it last week that they will be doing it because this was their last gambit in terms of trying to create enough instability in the country in order to collapse the regime, or the government as we know it. What has happened over the last week, and in particular the last 48 hours, is that this pivot has become more clear. And I think what we spoke about last week, it stands, because what has happened in Syria in the last 48 hours in particular is that the Syrian Democratic Forces, or the Rojava region so-called, has ultimately been sold by the West to the new Syrian government. Tom Barak, if you know him, he's the American ambassador to Turkey. I think he's a former venture capitalist. I think he was in Lebanon insulting the Lebanese government and trying to harass them into disarming Hezbollah recently. He was in Damascus at the start of the weekend and throughout the weekend, at the time that the Syrian forces were moving into take Rojava or take Raqqa. There's been quite a lot of bloodshed in northern Syria in the last couple of days, out primarily by the new Syrian forces. So they attacked Raqqa initially, but they take a lot of towns and cities. They take a lot of land in what was Rojava and are engaging in wide-scale brutality against civilians, former YPG fighters, and they're emptying the prisons of ISIS as well, as we predicted only last year. I'm unaware of exactly how many ISIS fighters, ISIS members, ISIS family members who are still in prison. I think we spoke about it last year. We came to figures of between 35 and 70,000. So a lot of them haven't been through any sort of judicial process or anything. They've been held in prisons for 7, 8 years in some cases. Whether they were members of ISIS or not, I don't doubt that many of them weren't, but the vast majority obviously were. But even if they weren't, these people have been in prison surrounded by ISIS with no judicial process, not being able to see their families for 7 or 8 years. So even if they weren't radicalized before, they certainly are now. So these people are being emptied out of prisons. They're meting out violent revenge on the Kurds. I've seen awful videos. I won't go into any great detail other than to say that they're up to the old tricks that they were about 7 or 8, 9 and 10 years ago. These people haven't changed. How it links to Iran is that this pivot is represented by the selling of the Kurds at this very time. It's a very curious time that they sold them, because right after the protests and the violent riots in Iran have stopped, is because without the Kurds, the Kurds potentially key component of destabilizing the Iranian regime through the methods that they were using all along. And it's going to be very difficult to motivate these Kurdish groups now that the Kurdish controlled land in northeast Syria is no longer Kurdish controlled. They know that they've been sold out by the West. They know that they've been sold out by the United States and Israel and Europe, everyone. They're not going to be motivated to do what it was hoped that they would do in Iran. So to me, that represents the Kurds are no longer have any utility. They're not going to be used in Iran by the West. And so because they've lost their utility, now they're going to get sold to the Syrian regime so that they can get their oil and wheat back, perhaps stabilize their country. Now, stabilizing their country, of course, is very short-sighted, I'd imagine, because as many decisions carried out by the Americans are and the Israelis are, once it's outside their borders, with this dismantling of Rojava comes all these many thousands of prisoners, all these many thousands of jihadists who are going to be given a gun, going to be given a uniform, and are going to be given new orders. I don't know how you can control these people. I don't know, will they control these people? But I think the objective now is a pivot from Iran to Hezbollah and Lebanon. So these people are going to be, required soon to turn their guns on Hezbollah, I reckon, because obviously the authorities in Beirut have effectively been unable to reach any sort of agreement with Hezbollah. They're not going to be able to disarm Hezbollah. Hezbollah could probably win a civil war if they want to. Obviously, nobody wants a civil war in Lebanon except for people outside Lebanon. This is all very worrying, but I'd imagine, like I said in the group chat earlier, this is on a very difficult but necessary step for the very distant liberation of Syria, because what use is an uprising now in Damascus-controlled Syria if they still don't have the oil and wheat? It's still controlled by America and their proxies in the northeast. Again, this is a very necessary and difficult step towards, as I say, the liberation of Syria. It is important at this moment as well to critique the SDF in particular, because they're not necessarily representative of the Kurdish people. I see a lot of anarchists, eco-socialists, and feminists online who have been involved with Rojava in one sense or another, who are very proud supporters of Israel, Some of them take a very neutral stance in Israel and Palestine. But that's not necessarily representative of the Kurdish civilians. But it's the Kurdish civilians who are going to get the brunt of this. Like the Kurdish leadership, like they've made probably quite an awful lot of money from their alliance with the Americans and the Israelis through control of the oil and wheat regions. There's a reason why they didn't normalize with the Syrian Arab Republic when it was the correct option to them back in around 2017 and 18. They could have normalized with them, but they chose not to because I believe that they were bribed. They accepted it and they carried on. There was a situation arose in 2019 when they actually turned to the Syrian Arab Army to come into the north and try and defend them from a Turkish assault from the north, from the north of the border. The SAA went in there. I think Iranian militias went in there. They suffered a lot of deaths. But even after that, there was absolutely no indication that they would normalize with the Syrian Arab Republic, and they were instrumental in the dismantling of the Syrian Arab Republic and the I suppose what's ongoing right now there at the moment, which is over the last year, wide-scale sectarian killings, which are only going to increase with these very many thousands of free prisoners. I'd imagine it's a very distressing time for people in Syria. If anything's going to motivate the people who oppose the regime in Syria to take up arms, to organize, however likely or possible that is, then it is going to be the current set of events. At the moment, the popular mobilization forces are strengthening the border with Iraq at the moment in preparation for potential assaults from Syria. Anything could happen, but all of this could have been avoided if Kurdish leaders hadn't accepted bribes in order to side with Israel in the West to destabilize the region on behalf of clients of Jeffrey Epstein. I suppose, and obviously a lot of the Kurds, a lot of the region of Rojava was, particularly along the Euphrates, it was based on regions that were Arab majority. It wasn't Kurdish areas. So there is a lot of resentment there, not just because of that fact, but the fact that the Kurds were party to unspeakable crimes against humanity that came from American air power along the Euphrates, starting in Raqqa and moving all the way down to the border with Iraq, where they were leveling towns, they were leveling cities, they killed untold thousands of civilians. The Kurdish groups then came in and mopped up everything that was left. Again, there is a lot of resentment there. There is going to be a lot of violence meted out against the Kurds. There's a couple of people online taking almost like victory laps because the Kurdish movement has collapsed. Because a lot of people are saying that over the years that they've helped the Americans. They've correctly noted that they've helped the Americans destroy Syria. What's going to happen over the next couple of weeks and months in that region is going to be reminiscent of the mid-2010s, which saw the worst violence against minorities in Syria. So it's a very worrying time there, but again, we can only live in hope. What of the Western leaders of the left? What do they have to make of all this? Well, in America, you have Zoran Mamdani and his wife. They support the Syrian insurgency. With AOC, you have Bernie Sanders. They effectively supported the IDF and Iranian death squads. Chomsky supported the Syrian Democratic Forces. In the UK, you have Sultana supporting the FSA, the Syrian insurgency. Corbyn, Polanski's Green Party both support Iranian death squads. In Ireland, the left leaders have consistently supported imperialists. And today, People Before Profit, the Socialist Party, carry imperialist propaganda even when they are giving, mealy-mouthed opposition to imperialist wars. So, I mean, what can you do? We have absolutely no leadership. So, of course, naturally, people on the left are going to have their heads in the sand or just be completely unaware of what is happening in the world. So we need to be as loud as possible. We need to speak to as many people as possible. And we need to expose these leaders as well to the best of our ability. And I hope that we can, not just with this podcast, but with our writing, with speaking to friends, colleagues, speaking in any sort of capacity we can, on any platform we can. We need to do as much as we can because we have a clue, and unfortunately, many of our comrades don't.
Thank you, Morgan. Thank you very much. And I'd like to I know you moved from Iran to Syria and then back to the West and the so-called left, but maybe on the issue of Syria and the Kurds, the situation, we might even go to Owen or Sami after Tommy, and then Saeed, what do you think of Morgan's analysis, if that's okay? So Tommy, if you could unmute, I'll just ask you more broadly if there's anything else maybe that you feel it's hard to find any gaps from Barry to Saeed to Morgan, but anything else maybe that hasn't been brought up. But also, Tommy, I'd love just to come back to Ireland. And as I said last week, for those who say, what's this got to do with us? In very simple terms, I think it's important to be able to address that question. Of course, we know what imperialism has got to do with us, but if we can just clarify that and make it a little bit more simple for the working class of Ireland.
Right, two issues there, Róisín. One, can I comment maybe for a few minutes on Iran? And I think, interestingly, I believe that the Americans who are leading the imperialist attack on Iran have now possibly decided to put it on the long finger. I'm looking at an article by Richard Haas, former advisor to Colin Powell through the George Bush era, and he's advising in an article in the Financial Times, to transform Iran, the West needs patience, not overreach. So is the title of the article. Playing a long game paid off with the Soviet Union, and Tehran could follow a similar path. In other words, this is a key advisor to the US State Department through the Bush era. He's now posing as an academic, as distinct from an advisor to the imperialism, which is a difference in terms of what's happening in some of these US universities. But he's a 5-point plan, and I'll not go into all the details, but he's effectively saying that Iran cannot be overturned by a military assault, either ground assault or even by bombing from the air. And that the government of Iran, as they describe it, the regime in Iran, but the government of Iran has not collapsed. There's no divisions, there's no splits, there's no alternative. And that the people and the armed forces of Iran have stayed solidly and loyal to the state. So what he's advocating is a long-term policy and a 5-point plan. Now, this is not to say that this is exactly what the Yankee machine is going to do, but I think you take it from someone with the experience of Richard Haas, that he's influential at least, and he's talking about using very severe economic sanctions. They've been perpetrating economic sanctions on Iran already, but he's advocating that these are maintained and increased if possible, and any shipping or aircraft visiting Iran be stopped and intercepted, effectively putting a siege around the country the same way as they've done to Cuba. And then, of course, that's the first option. Secondly, is to economically reward those that are willing to do a deal with the West. Thirdly, to employ some diplomatic strategies to again reward those that are willing to deal with the United States on a basis. Fourthly, to work with the opposition both at home and abroad, to encourage the Iranian opposition abroad to contact their relatives and friends in Iran to persuade them that the West obviously has the answers. And finally, to take the long-term view that it'll be strangulation rather than an immediate overturn. So I think I believe that seems to make sense to me, that it'll be the US and their imperialist allies' approach to Iran, that they're going to plan a long-term strategy rather than an immediate assault. Now, that doesn't mean to say they're not run bombing raids as they did through Trump through the 12 days, or that the Israeli Mossad won't attempt assassinations or carry out assassinations and whatnot. But I think that it'll be a long-term strategy. It's what they're attempting to do with Iran. So I think we've got to look for that and look how to help the West to see what's happening in Iran, rather than take this attitude that there's some sort of a upsurge that we can support in Iran from the left. There is not. That's not to say, as Barry has pointed out, and the other contributors have pointed out, that there aren't problems in Iran, there are difficulties in Iran. But as Saeed has pointed out, this misleading picture that women are oppressed because they can't swim in swimsuits on the beach is wrong. Women in Iran definitely wear the hijab, but they drive motor cars, they manage businesses, they are massively involved in the media, both print and digital media and television, hosting stations. this concept, that this knee-jerk reaction about women, is not accurate. Having said that, there are certain obvious economic problems not caused by sanctions and the free market. But having said that, take a look at it in the round, and Iran has to stand. Imperialism has its designs, and imperialism is currently, as it is led by the United States, in a difficult position. The United States empire is clearly incredibly powerful militarily, but economically it's in chaos. It's economically in decline. China has overtaken the United States in terms of production. And as we said the last podcast we done, the axis is shifting away from the United States and its imperialist allies in the West. But in the process, there is the danger, of course, of a frankly massive military confrontation. Why would Ireland be interested? Well, as Saib has pointed out, if Trump and his allies, and bear in mind that for whatever disputes or tifts there are at the moment between Keir Starmer and his European Union people and Trump, that at the end of the day they're all on the same side. And if Trump and his colleagues decide to take Greenland because they need it to defend US interests, there's every good reason, as Saib has very accurately pointed out, why they won't decide someday to capture Ireland. Keep in mind that Ireland has become crucially important within the Western capitalist zone because of our data centres, which are backup for so much of the CIA, British intelligence, and Mossad intelligence files, backup and monitoring of international social media contacts, and also the use of Shannon Airport, for example. Plus, never forget that in the north of Ireland we have also got a NATO basis. So on that basis, why not just say, right, we need Ireland the same way as we need Greenland? We've got to be very careful about that, because that's what will happen. And for centuries, the British Empire decided that Ireland was a strategically vital asset, necessary asset, perpetuated the plantation of Ulster in order to carry out its nefarious work, very similar to what the imperialists have done in Palestine, plantation of Palestine, for their use as a garrison to protect their interests in the Middle East, and therefore access beyond it. By the same token, British global imperialism could once again decide that Ireland's a key spot, and we've got to be very careful about that we don't fall into the trap of providing imperialism with a gift. So, Sinead.
Gara mai agat, Tommy. Saib, I'm going to come to you first, then maybe Owen or Sammy, because Owen, you wrote a great article there on Öcalan, actually. So I know I'm jumping back to Syria and the Kurdish influence and what might actually happen, and also the kind of romantic view of the Kurds in Ireland in particular, amongst, as Morgan said, the eco-socialists. Well, maybe good to get your take. First of all, Saib, Tommy has addressed and seems to concur with your analysis of why not Ireland as well. I'm just curious to know what you think, because Owen and myself were talking about this, about, Tommy, you mentioned the data centres, like Ireland is a hub of data centres, but are they actually essential? Would they be strategic infrastructure, or would it just be the like of Intel that has its headquarters, its European headquarters in Ireland? Would it matter if the data centres, say if the US were to pull out economically out of Ireland, or is what Tommy is saying that would be that there could be a similar strategy of doing to Ireland what is happening to Greenland right now?
It's a good question. You see, it's digital information, and usually digitals have something physical like storage. You'll see it in Ireland, in some in the north and the south, belong to massive companies of data, and it will be in the cloud stored as well. But if they decided to remove the infrastructure at some stage from Ireland, it's not an easy job. And that could create bugs and things for the system which they don't want to. So Ireland become a very important hub for the imperialist kind of or a pillar for their technology onwards. This is going to create a huge difficulties for Ireland in the future. And we believe the Zionist entity, even at some stage, or still maybe a lot of data and a lot of this manipulated in Ireland, and that is controlled by some companies who are maybe Israelis or linked to it. This is a part, and this is why Ireland have to look very carefully at its own neutral status with this kind of international law, the absence of the international law today. Would it be respected? Or even if Ireland want to join NATO, do you think the United States of America is respecting NATO? Because Norway is a part of NATO, and Trump insisting wanted to take a Greenland, whatever they think. Would NATO stand against the United States of America's interest? This is another thing in here to think. But when you have a country as neutral as Ireland, which is being respected by all the international big players, and Ireland always, I remember even when I was a long time ago, students, I seen how Ireland was respected by all the major powers. I heard the last Soviet ambassador saying that, and I heard the Chinese, even the Japanese, from the communists to even the extreme liberals in there. They all respect Ireland. The Arabs. So why don't you build on this status and keep an island as icon for neutrality? And the people will be more willing to defend Ireland from all sides of the universe. The global south and the global north will stand by Ireland. By when you corner Ireland in a failing alliance like the NATO, then you are doomed. You don't know. You are as I want to repeat the statement Henry Kissinger said at some stage. To be a friend with the United States of America is dangerous. To be a friend with dangerous. To be an enemy, fatal, something like that, which means being a friend with the United States of America is more dangerous than being an enemy. This is the gist of it. So Ireland should, the intellectuals of Ireland, the thinkers, the one who really loves Ireland as a country, who their ancestors spilled the blood in here to liberate it, should look carefully at this what's happening right now, because we are a pre-Westphalia era right now. There is nobody respecting even the Westphalia agreements between European powers. There is no rule-based order anymore. As you see, if you want to understand this very well, look at what the Americans used the United Nations Security Council to create a resolution 2803, which is created the Trump Peace Council over Gaza. And that is council, it means it's not just for Gaza. This is eliminating United Nations influence in the Arab world and West Asia, and imposing Trump and his peace council to control that region, and pushing the United Nations and its organization out of the region. And this will be reflected in Europe, reflected in East Asia, and of course in Latin America. There, going back to you were talking about in Syria, and I want to just something at some stage I had a conversation during maybe 10 years ago or less with a barrister, a friend of mine. We're talking about Syria. I said the problem in Syria, in here, most of the left in Europe, most of them are Trotskyists, and most of them they look, even the liberals or the left in West Europe and in the United States of America and Canada, Australia, New Zealand, all of that. They look at Assad like he is the living Stalin. And this is the problem we face. And the same thing was in Syria, the same thing was in Libya, the same thing, and even with the left. what we have to do to tell them Stalin passed away in the 50s. We cannot understand this. This is the way the left in Europe think of socialism or anti-imperialist movement in the Arab world. They look at the PFLP as a Stalinist. They look at the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine as a Stalinist. They look at all the socialists in the Arab region at the time as a Stalinist. So we, in that region, we've been waged a war against us from the left and of the imperialists at the same time. Twofold, like we are cornered. This is one of the thing. The other thing regarding, I remember I spoke the last time about there is an emerging kind of, don't want to call it alliance, but understatement or memorandum of understanding between the Turkish, the Saudis, maybe the Iranian and the Egyptians as well. Egypt and Iran is very tricky to find them getting closer. They are getting closer at the minute. And part of that, you see Egypt active right now in defending Somalia, which will help in kicking Israel, which is recognized a kind of defecting region of Somalia. Israel, the only country in the world to recognize that, to use it against the Arabs in Yemen or to corner Iran in the future. And the same thing we see in what Qassad, the DCF in Syria, were doing. These are guys, as I said the last time, Israel is creating something called the David Corridor from Sueda in Syria, Dar'a up there, and linking it through the American presence in the Tanaf border between Syria and Iraq and Jordan to these Kurdish movement in north Syria, and then link them through what they call in the north region of Iraq. So that can tighten the noose around Iran. Why Iran? Because Iran is the head of the resistance movement in the region. Bottom line, this is the way they look at they hit Hamas and the Palestinian resistance, they hit Hezbollah, they collapse Syria, because Syria was the logistic line and, as they say sometimes, the beating heart of the resistance. Assad regime was facilitating the existence of the resistance in Palestine, in Iraq, in Lebanon, to take them and put de facto terrorist groups, which there are millions in their heads, and in Syria, and to dismantle Syria and to try to divide it in the future between fighting factions that suits the Turks, suits the Zionist entity, because them too, the one who managed to collapse Syria with the help, of course, of Gulf states money. So today, when you see what's happening in Syria, this is Saudi money and Turkish power behind the Syrian Julani attacking the Kurdish movement. As my comrade was right when he identifying historically the period when the Kurds refused even to cooperate, even after they betrayed Syria and betrayed the Arab Republic of Syria and the Arab army and fought against it and facilitated the invasion of the Americans of Syria and handing them over the wealth of Syria. That's the Kurds who done that. The DFS and the PYJ, or what they call him, which is all of them kind of branches of the BKK in there. And those people, as I said last week, they claim they portray with their freedom fighters, the ladies or the men, like the PLO in the 60s and 70s, the same, the Palestinian resistance fighter, the same images. They get Palestinian freedom fighters, boys or girls, and they copycat that and they beam it, because that Layla Khalid images and that influence widely the left around the world. So they want a few slogans of Marx-Leninist kind of ideology, and suddenly they are Marx-Leninists while they are in the payroll of the CIA and the Mossad. Can't believe it. But this is the way they work, because the whole thing, the whole design is to collapse the region. And Israel playing it as minorities and is the defender of the minorities, the Kurdish, the Druze, and this. In the Arab world, in West Asia, those people lived for hundreds of thousands of years, if you don't want to go more than that, before even these kind of Ukrainian Jews came and created their Zionist entity in Palestine. In nearly 8 years. We're talking about thousands of years. So many minorities in that region, because that region is the heart of the world. Of course, you're going to find the Chinese, Russians, British, Irish, any nationalities in there in Palestine or in Syria and there. And those people, like Aleppo city is the capital of the Silk Route, which is today they call it the Belt and Road Initiative in China. It's the ancient times. So these things, people understand that. The people are not naive, as I said. Whatever you want to do, whatever, these people moving from the region beside Turkey and swallowing, like Egyptian land, and suddenly because of the collapse of the regime, they want to create this and that, and financed by the Zionist entity, because the Zionist entity have a project to survive. They have to destroy Iran, and rightly, as my comrade said, they want to divide Iran among ethnic rules. They want the Tajik to have their own state, the Bush to have their own state, the Arabs have to have their own state, and then all of these entities have to fight each other to keep that country destroyed, and then together maybe they'll fight the Persians. This is the design for that, but that won't happen, because the ones who's running Iran today, it's a collective from all of these minorities. There is not one race is in there involved. The supreme leader is from the Azari kind of, he's not a Persian, he's the Azari, which is, they are linked to Turkey, these guys. And nearly 40% of the people in Iran have their ancestors are Turks and that. So anything happen to them will influence their brothers next door in Azerbaijan, on Turkey, and all of that. Saying that what the Americans really want from Iran at the end of the day, one thing, to stop supporting the Palestinians. This is the bottom. If Iran today declared, I have nothing to do with Palestine, trust me, you will see in the stock market anything to do with Iran is sky high going, because the first thing the Iranians done, they put, after the revolution of 1979, they gathered anything to do with the Zionist entity and they handed it to the PLO. And they handed them their embassy in there, said, this is the PLO embassy in here, Palestine embassy. Anything. And at the time, as I heard, Mohammed Hassanin Heikel used to be information minister during Nasser period, and he was one of the best journalists worldwide as well after that. He used to say, like, we are supporting the Khomeini, and he done a book about Khomeini after the leader of the Islamic Revolution in Iran. He asked me, asking Heikel, he said, Khomeini said, we listened to you to be anti-Zionist, anti-imperialist, and suddenly when we are achieved the revolution in there, you became friends with the imperialists and the Zionists. What happened in here? He said there is shift after 1979, Egypt gone to the Americans and the Israelis, Iran went in the other direction with the revolution. The Iranian people believed in our rhetoric against imperialism, against Zionism, and suddenly those people who were beaming that rhetoric, some of them went to the Zionist camp. This is what happened in the Arab world. I say thank God for that, otherwise would have been under the American boots and tanks for a long time. The Americans want Iran, they say, they come to the table, surrender, or you enrich uranium, 460 kilograms of 60%. That's one. You have to destroy your ballistic missiles kind of capabilities. Iran have extreme advanced ballistic, supersonic ballistic missiles kind of industrial base. They promised once they hit, they're going to have, as I said last week, 2,000 rockets hit Israel at once. That will destroy the whole entity. If it's 300 in the 12 days, destroyed third of it. So this is why they were, Netanyahu and that, phoning Trump and worried, please, we are not ready to defend ourselves now. Just back down. And they backed down. They backed down as well because we said their rioters lost communication, as we said the other time, with the Starlink. Over 10,000 point of communication through Starlink became blind. the American discovered the Iranian have state-of-the-art technologies in radar systems. They have radars which they call it extra cold radars, which you cannot even feel or find where they are to destroy them. So at the end of the day, these things can discover all the Americans F-35 and that, and then Iran becomes a blank canvas in front of them. This is why the American policy said, once we cannot hit the targets we're supposed to, okay, we will be laughing stock for the whole international community, and we will lose a huge chunk of our pride, which is built on power and double down power and stuff like that. So the Americans were scared, and the Zionist entity, as I think I remember saying that last week, they built so many layers to protect the Zionist entity. They have the THAAD, the American highest camp, and they have the Arrow, and they have the Israelis one, Sih, and they have the Iron Dome, and another 5 layers, and still the Iranian went in and arrived and destroyed massively. And the THAAD alone, which the Americans need to defend themselves, because this is out of atmosphere. America, as I said last week, only produce 50 rockets a year, because that is high tech, needs a lot of processing and a lot of rare minerals and stuff like that, which today there is lack of them. And the other points after that, they want from Iran to cut its links with the Palestinian resistance, Lebanese resistance, or influence in the region, to become just a normal state, nothing to do with the alliance of Russia and China or the Shanghai kind of links. Iran will shrink to be just a normal little controlled state like Saudi Arabia or United Arab Emirates, who will do as it's told. And the Iranian people discovered how brilliant to be independent, sovereign, listen to no one, and take your own decision from your own interest, not the Zionists or the United States of America. And this is one of the major. I don't want to speak any further, but I can answer any question.
Thank you, Saib. It would be great if you could stay on. I want to officially thank Barry Murray for the introduction to tonight's programme, to yourself, Saib, to Tommy McKerney, so 2 panelists from the Peadar O'Donnell Socialist Republican Forum who are with us every week. Please come back next week, and also to Morgan O'Kearda, who's based in Cork and who gives us nearly hourly updates on our WhatsApp group. It's great to have, so we nearly know what's coming on our programme on a Monday night. Thank you all.